All right, welcome, Dr. Wright. Congratulations. This English students have chosen you to be our next faculty spotlight. Um, and before we get started, some students have sent in questions for you, but I have a couple standard questions, and I'll start with one of those, which is how long have you been teaching, and how many of those years have been at WCU specifically?
Okay, so I've been teaching forever. I got my master's degree in 1992, and I taught while I was getting my master's degree. No, I'm sorry, I got my master's degree in 95. I started in 92. And so I taught as a graduate student from 92 to 95. In 1995, I got a job as a lecturer at North Carolina State University, where I taught for 4 years. And in 1999, I went to the University of Massachusetts to get my PhD. And I taught at the University of Massachusetts for the 5 years that I was there working on my PhD. I got out and I taught for 1 year in a visiting assistant professor position at Wagner College in New York. And then I got the job at Western in 2005. So I've been here since 2005. And I've been teaching in some way, shape, or form since 1992.
Wow,
Yeah.
impressive. And you've been up and down the East Coast, it sounds like.
Yeah, yeah, and all over the UNC system because I got my undergrad from Appalachian State, my master's from East Carolina. I taught at NC State, and now I'm at Western. So I've been all over the University of North Carolina system.
Cool.
Yeah,
So if anyone has any questions about the UNC system, they can ask you.
I know a lot. Yes.
All right. And that leads me to one question from a student, and they just asked, why WCU?
Well, okay, so this is I have a really good answer for this question. My family is from Western North Carolina since the 1700s. My family is from Buncombe and Haywood counties and Henderson County. So like the Hendersonville area, Asheville, and in some parts of Haywood County out in the Waynesville area as well. And so um, my people are all over this region, and my mother and father both grew up in Mills River, which is really close to Hendersonville. My father went to Western Carolina and graduated in, I want to say 1960 with a business degree. So I've always, and my family, I grew up in Greensboro. So we always came to the mountains because my entire extended family was up here. So I pretty much, was here when I wasn't there. And I went to school at Appalachian. I always wanted to live in the mountains. And when I was living in New York, my sister lived in Asheville, and I desperately wanted to be in Asheville. I just was like trying to figure out how to get out of, I hated New York. I hated living in New York. And I really wanted to be back in the mountains. And the job opened up, and I just was like, I'm getting that job. And it's actually really hard to get a job in this field. And I just was like, I don't know, I made up my mind, and I was like, I will do whatever, and I'm going to get that job. So I was very determined to get this specific job, which I mean, I feel like I'm really, really lucky that I got it, because that doesn't work out that way for many people. So yeah.
Yeah. Now your answer, I had an idea of where I was going to go with this interview, but your answer just leads right into another student question,
Okay.
um, which is how did you find your way in the field? You said it's a little difficult for this field.
Yeah, I don't, I started out at Appalachian with, I was going to major in psychology. And then I decided I didn't want to do that, and I was going to major in biology. And then I decided I didn't want to do that. And I don't know, I really liked literature. I'd always liked to read. I felt like I was really good at it. And it made sense to me. I don't know. It's kind of hard to like explain that. I just felt like it was the thing that I like to do more than anything. It made sense, and I was good at it. And I also feel like, that's a really privileged position to be in, because, you know, most people, I think, go to college and they're not necessarily thinking about, do I have the luxury to do the thing that I really love to do? And am I going to do the thing that's going to get me the job that's going to make me money? And I just kind of decided I was going to do the thing that I really loved, and then I would figure out how to do something with it when I got out. But yeah, I liked the English major because it had less structure. I felt like it was less authoritarian. I felt like I could make my own rules in it, which is kind of, how I've always been. I don't really like to be told what to do. So I think that's a big part of it. It felt like a lot more freedom to do something in this field than to do those other things that I thought I was interested in. And I mean, I still think psychology and biology are wonderful. They just weren't what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Um, so you talked about how you've always loved literature. And another student wants to know what made you fall in love with literature. And if I have a follow-up question to that too, which
I think I've always had like a really, I'm the older of two children in my family, and the age gap between my sister and me is like 5 years. So in a lot of ways, I'm psychologically an only child. So I am very used to having this sort of a lot of time by myself. I mean, I sort of, grew up for a long time alone. And I think as a result, have a really active imagination and a very complicated inner life, very introverted. And I just really, I liked books because I could get lost in them, and because they showed me things that I couldn't see, just taught me about the world in ways, I guess, that made sense to me. I've always thought that fiction has been a better teacher for me personally about the world and about people than other ways of knowing things like history or science. Because I think literature is really good at activating the empathetic imagination. It's good at creating empathy. And there's actually been studies that say that reading literary fiction helps people become more empathetic. And so I think, as an empathetic person anyway, I really just sort of sucked all that in, and it kind of gave me fuel. I guess I'm not even entirely sure. It just feels like it's hard to even explain at this point, what about literature kind of pulled me in, because it's like breathing. It's been a part of my life for so long, you
yeah.
know? Yeah.
That might make the next question a little harder then,
Yeah.
because someone else wants to know, was there a certain story or work that made you acknowledge your love of literature, and has it been reflected in your work?
Well, I think there have been a lot of them. I think the one that I always kind of come back to is Margaret Atwood's novel, The Handmaid's Tale, which I read in the early 90s. That book came out in the mid 80s, and I didn't read it until the early 90s, I think. Or maybe I read it I think I was still in college when I read it. And I remember at the point that I read it thinking, I'll never be able to write like this. And Margaret Atwood is saying all the things that I feel and think about the society that I live in a way that I could never express. And it was like this really profound moment for me, because she was writing about a very specific period in American history, but she was doing it in the context of this dystopia where women's rights were completely stripped from them. And, this really horrific fascist regime was in place. And I actually could see this happening around me, and I could, make sense of it in sort of an intellectual way. But she was doing something through art that, that I don't know, activated something else. And I think that was a moment where I was like, I had the realization that I could never write novels, because I never would be able to do what she did, and that she was already doing all the things that I would want to do. And I'm sure there are plenty of others. I mean, there have been, numerous books, I think, that have just really floored me over the course of my life. But I think, even if I had to choose one and say that was a pivotal moment, then it was probably that one. I would also say Toni Morrison's novel Beloved, and I don't remember when I read it, but it also had a similar kind of impact on me.
Yeah. Um, and you said you realized you would never be able to write novels, but um, how would you say it has been reflected in your work, using those one or two novels?
Well, I mean, I've written plenty of things about those works. I've written a lot of criticism. I've published a lot on lots of different works of literature. But I mean, I guess, one of the things about writing academically, which is more of what I do, is that writing academically is like working through a really complicated math problem about a text. That's kind of the way I think about it. So, to start out and have an idea about a text that you want to convey, and then working through and talking about that. I think I've been really shaped in my scholarly focus by women's literature. I wrote my master's thesis on women's literature, African women's literature in particular. So I feel like the works that I have read by women have really shaped my kind of feminist ethos in the world. I definitely have shaped the way that I think about my place in the world. Ditto sort of works by people of color and the way that they have impacted my view of the positions of people of color in the world, colonized subjects. So I feel like, I don't really, what was the question? I feel like, I feel like all of this stuff is like, while I'm not a person who writes fiction, all of these fictional works have shaped my view of the entire world in which we all live.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And your students, or at least one of them, obviously knows that you're involved in like feminist movement, and so and they asked what got you involved with the ecofeminism movement.
So, I've always been, so I guess it started with animals. This is a really complicated question for me. I don't even know how to disaggregate me being like a vegan. I feel like veganism is a huge environmental um, stake, and it's this thing that one does to try and avoid cruelty on a large scale. That's also really environmentally positive. The ecofeminist, I sort of, okay. So the book that I read that really shaped my thinking with regard to ecofeminism is a book by a woman named Carol Adams, and it's called The Sexual Politics of Meat. And it's about sort of the linkages between animals and women and nature, and the way that all of these oppressions are interconnected. And of course, we have the word intersectional now, which I think is really useful. When she wrote that book, it was in the early 1990s, and intersectionality was not a thing. But it was, she's doing a lot of work talking about the ways in which oppressions are linked and they're intersecting. And if we address just one of them, then we're missing the sort of larger structural issues that are allowing for us to oppress nature and animals and women and colonized people. And so that's just really, I just feel like, I don't know, my whole life has kind of been this exercise in trying to do as little harm as possible to as many beings as possible, which is an exercise in futility, because everything you do is somehow or other impacting other creatures and other people. But I guess I've just always wanted to try and reduce harm in as many ways as possible. And so I also think the literature that I teach and the way that I teach, without being overt and without being like, you should all be vegan and, zero emission cars and whatever, just to try and like at least get at a sense of recognition of our shared existence with not only other peoples on the planet, but with other non-human peoples on the planet, with the trees, with the air that we breathe. That sounds very kumbaya, but yeah, I hope that's a good enough answer. I'm not sure.
Yeah, yeah, and it reminds me that you're one of the only scholars working in vegan studies, correct?
I'm the person who invented vegan
Yeah, yeah,
studies. Yeah, no, so there are other people doing it now, but yeah, I came up with it kind of as a response to being vegan and being really tired of seeing vegans being made fun of in the media and on the news. And I was like, can we just look at why that happens? And so that's kind of where that came from. But
Yeah,
yeah.
that's so cool that we have a professor here that invented a whole topic of study.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I had no idea it would be a thing, but it kind of is a thing. So,
Yeah,
which I guess just means that there are enough people interested in some of the ideas that, were interesting to me at the time. So, yeah.
very cool.
Thank
Um, I think that that's probably the heaviest questions that we have. Um,
you.
but bringing it back down, would you recommend entering into a doctoral program?
This is a really good question. I have lots of ways of answering this. When I entered my doctoral program, or actually when I entered the MA program, the United States was in a really serious recession. And I had graduated and I didn't know what the frick I was going to do with a BA in English. And I was like, well, I'll just go to grad school. And then when I applied for my to PhD programs, everyone said to me, you will never get a job when you get out. I mean, literally everyone, including all my professors. And, this was in the mid 90s or I'm sorry, late 90s when I applied to graduate school. I graduated from University of Massachusetts in 2004 and almost didn't get a job. I got lots of interviews and then I got kind of a temporary job before I got the permanent job that I have now. And it was really, really hard. Things are weird right now. I mean, I feel like we're in this period of time where our entire society's kind of been remade by this pandemic. And I think it's going to impact higher education. I think it's going to impact everything in ways that we can't really foresee right now. So I taught the English 618 class, I guess, in the fall, and we talked a lot about this because I kind of felt like we were all sort of going through this together. Like, what does this mean? Are there going to be jobs? Does it make sense to do a PhD? And I would say, I don't think it makes any less sense now than it ever has. I would advise people who are interested in getting a PhD definitely not to do one unless you can get um, a full ride and an assistantship to help you with it. Because the last thing you want to do is incur a bunch of debt. I mean, you're going to incur debt anyway if you get a PhD. But I think if it's the thing you love and that's the thing you want to do and you feel like you have the resources to do it, then you should do it. I would never tell somebody not to do something that they felt passionately about because you can't predict where the world's going to be, 5 years from now. Like if you enter a PhD program now and graduate in 5 years, who knows what the world is going to look like? So, yeah, maybe that's advice that is different from what some of my colleagues might offer, but I think I've always been held pretty true to the fact that you have to do what you feel strongly about within reason, making sure that you have the resources available to you to be able to do it. So yeah, that's why I always say get an assistantship and get some financial backing before you say yes to a program.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's always helpful.
yeah, and necessary, really necessary with a PhD.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And that's great advice. And I have a question that I always ask um, faculty members that do this spotlight interview. What advice do you have for students? So do you have any general advice for your students or specific to undergrad or graduate?
Um, just in general in the world, or like more specifically about things.
Um, we could do both if you have something. Really just if one of your students came and asked you like what advice would you give me, like the top the top thing, what would you have to say to them? Or even specifically for dealing with with the pandemic. I know we're all dealing with it together, but
Yeah.
um,
Well, maybe I mean, I think the pandemic is a kind of a good thing to talk about because in teaching through it, and I've taught hybrid through it. So I've had lots of face-to-face, classes, and I think I've seen the toll that it's taken on everybody, on the faculty, on the students, on, everybody's families, just all kinds of stuff. And I think I mean, I feel this way generally, but I think that the thing I would say right now is to just be kind. Be kind, be forgiving, err on the side of grace. If if you're struggling, talk to people who might be able to help you. And I would say that to my students anyway. If you're struggling, just talk to me, because I want to make sure to work with you. So being able to communicate, and it's really hard in the age of Zoom to want to communicate. You can't just drop by people's offices or people's houses or whatever. But yeah, to be as forgiving and kind to yourself and to others as possible, because I think we're also living in these really polarized times where we're just sort of, as a society, at real odds with each other, and to try and like look past that and see the humanity in each other, and be as caring as we can during times that are unprecedented, because none of us have ever lived through anything like this. I don't think anybody on the planet has lived through anything like this.
Right.
Yeah, that's not really about school, I guess, or academics, but
I think it can be applied to school for sure.
sure, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And
and it,
yeah, to my students, I think, this semester and last semester, whenever anything would come up, I'd be like, I'm generally very forgiving. And right now I'm like even more forgiving than I've ever been in my life. Just turn something in and it'll be okay. So yeah.
yeah, and now to drastically change the tone.
Mhm.
Speaking of the pandemic, a student says that you've said that you've spent much of quarantine drinking, and they're curious to know what your drink choice is, and is it different at home than at a bar?
So, all right, I just want to say this is ginger ale. I'm not actually drinking right now. It's only like noon 30. Um, so first of all, I knew about this question, and I have not spent, I just want to say, I was joking when I said I've spent an inordinate amount of time drinking. But occasionally drinking has helped me through this. I'm kind of a white wine drinker, which I think makes me, the whitest white girl ever. Um, I'm sort of a fan of gin and tonics. If I go out to a bar, I will try and be more of a badass and drink something with bourbon in it, like just a bourbon on the rocks or something like that, because I'm trying to look like um, the stud that I'm not, pretty much. So yeah. Or I'll try something more exotic, because if I'm at home, I don't really care. But if I'm out somewhere, if there's some kind of fancy thing that I want to get, I'll do that. But I haven't
Yeah,
been out to a bar in I don't know how long. So
at least over a year, probably.
yeah, yeah, exactly. It's
Uh,
crazy.
yeah, and bars tend to have more options than you have at home.
Yes, yes, true.
And then we'll bring it back a little bit, back to literature, because this is your area.
Mhm.
Um, what is your least favorite book you ever read, and why?
Oh God, that's a really tough question. I mean, I've read a lot of bad books. I'm trying to think of it. Okay, so there's one, I can think of one that I taught that I really hated. And it's a novel by a British author named Ian McEwan, and it's called Solar. And it is a work of climate change fiction. So I taught a whole class on climate change fiction some years back. And his novel came out, I want to say in the 2010s, somewhere in there. And he's a hugely famous British writer, and has written a lot of things for which he's received a lot of praise. And this is a book that was sort of supposed to be satire, but it didn't really work. And I hated it, and the students hated it, and it was just an unqualified disaster to have on the syllabus. So I think that's been one of those books that I've really, really disliked. Um, I'm trying to think of it. I mean, I'm sure if I sat here and thought about it for a while, I could come up with other ones, but yeah, that was one. And I think because I taught it, that we all just were like, why is this happening to any of us? So yeah.
That's nice to know that sometimes the professor doesn't like the choice of book too.
Yeah. And I think I will try, especially in grad classes, I will try and put at least one thing on the syllabus that I haven't read before, so that I'm reading it along with the class. And that was the book. So unfortunately, sometimes it works really, really well. Like in my last environmental lit class, I put Richard Powers' novel, The Overstory, on there. And it's this massive, huge book that's about trees. And it was wonderful. And we all loved it. And we ended the class on it. It was like one of the best things that I've ever done. But if you get a novel that you've never read and it's just awful, then, that happens also.
Oh boy.
Yeah. So it's a leap of faith. You're like, I hope this is good, but we'll find out together, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, that could be used, I guess, to let students know that, this happens.
Oh,
Yeah, there are good books, there are bad books, and I'm not going to just teach you my favorites.
yeah.
I think it's cool that you include a book that you haven't read either.
Yeah. Well, it's the only way that I get to read anything, because otherwise I'm too busy. So it's like it forces me to read something new. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. And I believe that was our last question.
Oh, okay.
But b because I would want to know if I were watching this interview, I'm sure that others will want to know, can you explain the picture behind you?
Oh, it's Peewee.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is Peewee Herman. Yeah, I don't know. There's this little store in Asheville called Loft, which stands for Lost Object Found Treasure. And it's just a bunch of like weird crap that's in there. So I don't know. One day I was in there. I really love Pee Wee Herman. Pee Wee's Big Adventure is like one of my favorite movies of all time. And I can recite like the entire thing backwards and forwards. And I just got it. And it's been like laying over on my bookshelf now for like several years. And I just rearranged my office. So my office, this is actually a pump organ. Like you can see the keys that belonged to my grandmother. And she gave it to me. This is also a photo of my grandparents and some of their friends that's up there with
Cool.
it. So I'm sort of using it. It works, but it's just hugely out of tune. It's really, really old. I'm sort of using it as a space to set stuff. And so when I was cleaning the other day, I just like set Peewee over there. And now he's like become part of my office. And I've noticed like I've had all these Zoom meetings, and people will be sending me like video clips of Pee-wee's Big Adventure or whatever. So now he's just kind of part of my thing.
Nice. I
Yeah,
love it.
good question. I have
Yeah.
lots. I've got like hold on, I'll show you other stuff. Hang on. I think I might have shown you guys this at the last happy hour, but this is my Elizabeth Warren action figure,
Mm,
and this is my Pippi Longstocking. So I have lots of like little, things.
that's cool. It makes your space fun.
Yeah, exactly. So, and
Nice.
cats and dogs. There's a cat behind my computer. There's dogs all over the place over here. So, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Now, and to wrap things up, is there anything else that you would like to share for your time in Spotlight?
No, I don't think so, but I just, thank you so much for asking me to do this. It's nice. And, I am always here to answer questions and would be happy to talk to anybody about anything. So yeah, thank you so much for this.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I've
Yeah.
had a lot of fun.
Yeah. Thanks. Me too.
All right. All right.
Cool.
Bye.
All right. Bye. See ya.